Hello and welcome to The Report, Cal State Fullerton's premier source for news, views, and info. I'm Nicholas Garcia.
I'm Evan Boydston.
And I'm Michelle Gao. On today's episode, we'll be discussing Trump and the possibility of opening libel laws, as well as Amy Goodman reporting at the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Plus, we'll be bringing you some local news on Measure GG, as well as a story on private prison stocks soaring after Donald Trump became president-elect.
All this and more on today's episode of The Report. Before we delve into our first hot topic, we'd like to invite you to be a part of the discussion this semester season. Click on the link in the caption of any of our report episodes to fill out a secure Google form with your opinion on any controversial issue that we've talked about now or in the past, as many of these issues are recurring and evolving, ranging from gun control to abortion, climate change, or the state of politics right now. All we ask is to please keep it civil, and as with any essay, cite your sources.
The American media has found new meaning to the phrase election hangover. President-elect Donald Trump has yet to retract his statements threatening to open up libel laws. His reconstruction of the laws would make it easier for public persons to sue news organizations at the federal level. Before his victory, Trump slandered the Washington Post and the New York Times, saying they were, quote, dishonest, end quote. He also wrote on his Facebook page a public denouncement of the accredited newspapers for their incredibly inaccurate coverage and reporting of the record-setting Trump campaign. The aftermath? Trump revoked press credentials to the Washington Post and other news platforms, but journalists and other media outlets have since been resilient. After covering Trump's sexual assault allegations, the Times released an open letter daring Trump to meet them in court. Current libel laws are largely under state jurisdiction. If the plaintiff can prove intentional malice from a publication, then he or she can win the case. If Trump partially repeals the First Amendment in his presidency, where will the future of journalists stand in the United States?
I feel like a lot of journalists are under a lot of hot water right now with the given election. That was something we talked about last week in the episode. So I don't doubt that he will try to do something to amend the First Amendment. I just don't know what specifically.
I don't think he can do anything, though.
He can't, though, without the support of, obviously, with our...
He's not going to be able to, but obviously I think it's going to go back to Nixon, where he's pretty much afraid of the press, and he already doesn't have a protective pool of press traveling with him. I think that it's going to be very limited of the press coverage, even of the president. You know, I think that we're going to see a lot more press credentials get revoked, even in the White House press corps, and it's going to result in lack of coverage from the press. But it's going to result, I think, in the press actually, you know, finding more information on their own, other than getting addressed by the press secretary. You know, the Times and the Washington Post saw huge surges of subscriptions last week after the election because people do not trust, you know, what he's presenting to be facts. They're, you know, disproved, you know, and the biased media side. So they're going to the newspapers and traditional forms of media to get more, you know, realistic and balanced news.
That's why I think that, like I said last week, there is going to be more independent news publications coming out. But then that also begs the question: Will Trump allow them to be in the press pools? Because then it'll be his press pools are eventually going to be essentially one-sided. It's going to be the people that he wants to be covering him, which is completely unfair and completely against what America stands for. And I just thought it was interesting because he actually passed up his press pool to go to a steak dinner the other night. Did you guys see that? So he's going to address the press when he wants, and he's going to have the press there that he wants. And that's going backwards essentially into what America is all about, especially with the First Amendment.
Absolutely. I think that we've made so much progress with the press, and I read a really good article, I think this might actually end up helping the press a little bit, about how, you know, despite this election and the results and him singling out reporters and reporters getting attacked, and journalists and the media in general, calling them crooks and whatnot, it's still one of the strongest checks on power that the Constitution gives us through the First Amendment. I think we're going to just get maybe a little stronger in checking and scrutinizing the government, scrutinizing him, and making sure that we're getting a balanced and fair, you know, information.
Well, the problem is also too that he essentially was right, though, that the press was wrong because he ended up winning. Oh, yeah. And that's adding fuel to his argument, you know, to present that other side. He's kind of right that they were presenting him
And he
they're
has,
presenting it wrong.
and he has all of his electorate, agreeing with him. Everybody who voted for him agrees that the media is the enemy.
Exactly.
Which doesn't help us.
There's a lot of, I feel like, different issues that he's trying to go through right now too. Like, his different opinions and everything. Did you see his public statement about climate change and how he's trying to withdraw from the Paris Accord? Right. So a lot of those things are just in the water right now, and so I think he's really nervous and afraid of the media, and that's why he's trying to do those limitations. Speaking of media, let's go into our next hot topic. In a methodical attack on freedom of the press, a reporter was issued an arrest warrant for coverage of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Amy Goodman of the broadcast series Democracy Now! Was charged for criminally trespassing while reporting on the Native American protests in North Dakota. Her team caught on camera the violent attacks security guards committed against peaceful protesters in September. The $3.8 million Dakota Access Pipeline is set to carry oil through sacred sites of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. This pipeline would also interfere with the tribe's natural water resource. In the now viral video, pipeline guards were seen releasing dogs and using pepper spray to tame the protesters. The case, State of North Dakota versus Amy Goodman, has received recognition from the Center for Constitutional Rights. Director Bahir Amzi stated this is, quote, an attempt to repress this important political movement by silencing media coverage, end quote. While Goodman faced a misdemeanor, neither of the two guards seen in the video have been charged or arrested. Goodman's case was dismissed earlier last month, but still remains strong. When do politicians get to label journalists as protesters? What red flags arise? What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, it's another thing on the First Amendment again, but the thing is, this is because this is from the privatization of the land, essentially. So technically, yes, she is protesting, but it's so controversial that they essentially are labeling her as a protester.
It's interesting though, because it's a First Amendment for them to, or their amendment to have like the privacy rights, but it's interfering with our First Amendment, which is the right to protest, peaceful protest. So, I mean, where do we draw the line there?
Well, I also think that the line needs to be drawn with, is she a protester or is she a journalist? I think if you ask Amy Goodman, she's a journalist. And I think if you ask anybody who's watching her show and watching her reports, they're going to say she's a journalist getting the story.
Yeah, but then the unfortunate thing is they're going to label her as a protester because it is on the private land. But where do they own the Sioux land? Because I feel like why is this private company able to go through the ancient tribal grounds and burial grounds? I don't understand that.
Well, I think that's a lot of the confusion too. And we see this in a lot of tribes, not just the Sioux tribe. We're taking their land, or corporations are taking their land, and it technically belongs to them. So, is it private property if it's their land, or is it now this company's?
Well, that's why this has been very hush-hush in the media, because I've not really heard anything about it until I saw Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!
I've also seen like Shailene Woodley.
Yeah. Things like that is what actually brings it up.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm sure they want to label the journalists there as protesters and write them off to keep it a little hush-hush.
Yeah.
What's interesting too is that I feel like social media has also become a very important part of the media and how a lot of people receive their news, and so I agree. I feel like there's a lot of hush-hush when it comes to this being covered, but I feel like a lot of people are talking about this a lot more, which is good, but it does uncover a lot of questions that we have.
Well, news breaks on Twitter, essentially, but that is also our demographic, so of course we're going to notice it. Older generations typically won't really care, and if they do, they'll consider them as protesters, essentially, because it's private land. Okay, then they're protesting, or they're considered protesters since they're on the private land.
No, absolutely. I think that even on Facebook for a good week, I saw a lot of friends checking in to that that spot as a protester. They couldn't be there physically, but they're protesting on social media. And I think that was the first time I've ever seen that in a protest, and it kind of died off. So I was like, did they follow through with it? Did they keep up with it? I think that's something that older generations might criticize the millennial generation for doing. Are they going to keep up with it?
What are your thoughts regarding going back to the security guards being violent with the pepper spray and the dogs? Do you think that video, after that video was released, even though she was penalized for it, should we use that, and can we penalize the security guards?
I think that's fair footage.
But then it comes to it was on private property, so no matter what, it comes back to that. They were hired privately to be security for that, and whatnot. But if this is barely at the start, and how much farther do they have to go? Like, I feel like there's going to be protests along the whole way when they're building this pipeline, because it's not even finished yet. It's pretty much at the very beginning.
Right.
So.
I think that we're in for a long ride, and we'll have to watch the coverage
Absolutely.
of it closely. Something else we might be watching is our next hot topic. The citizens of Cyprus rejected recent ballot measure GG, Cyprus Town Center and Common Specific Plan. The campaign proposed back in April by the Los Alamitos racecourse developers was to rezone public land. A vote in favor of their proposal would hand over these rights to the developers and allow them to build commercial developments on the land. But the ambiguity of the commercial proponents concerned citizens. In a public outreach meeting, the attorney representing the property owners shut down reporter John Underwood's video recording of the meeting. The attorney threatened to not proceed with the meeting until the camera was off and claimed it as a, quote, private meeting. Underwood was denied public access to a meeting that was in a public area with the city manager present. This comes after a previous zoning area was set to construct a retirement home, but instead had developers in association with Prologis Amazon. Although the ballot measure GG did not pass, another vote may take place in January to proceed with the plans in a special election. This measure begs the question, what is the level of transparency between government and private companies? With only proposed plans and no written contracts, the developers would be free to build anything once the rights are granted to them. So how do we feel about this?
So this was in a public civic center, and it was technically supposed to be a public meeting, but it was held by a private company, so that's what made it private essentially, and it's kind of a gray area, I guess. But with Measure GG, I was looking at it. I was looking at the area on a map, and essentially it would get rid of this green area. It's like some of the only green area, but the measure would allow the companies to do whatever they want once it's voted on. So they could say all these things. They could say we're gonna keep green spots, or we're gonna keep parkland, but they can, once they have the go ahead, they can do whatever they want. Yeah. And I know that there was some of the attorneys had ties to Walmart, so there's other reasons why they're there essentially, and they're going to turn into a strip mall. Right. But that's like with the privatization of this public land is really what's the problem here.
No, absolutely. I would agree that that's the big problem here. You know, privatizing public land, you know, you run a huge risk on what's going to happen with that land. And essentially, once they change it, the city can't say anything about, no, you need to keep it a park or anything like that. But also, you know, even though it might have been considered a private meeting, the city manager was there, and he's a public figure. You know, it was in a public place. So I think that is a gray area, but that's an issue. You know, we need to take care of those kind of loopholes.
Especially since it's a local issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll be interesting, especially since, I don't know, I feel like, what are the next steps for them to officially make it? Right?
Well, I'm glad the citizens. Yeah, I'm glad the citizens were at least aware enough to understand that what's actually going on and voting against them. Yeah. But now, since the election is over, do you think people, most of the citizens might not go out and vote again a second time? I feel like everyone's motivated to vote during election time, but now if they do a special vote in January, I feel like people are going to be demobilized. Can we clarify,
why is there a special vote for this?
Well, just because it's like a referendum to change it now.
It's kind of like appealing it. They want to bring it back.
That's so annoying. Sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, but who knows though? I mean, this could bring. I mean, if everything goes accordingly, what they say, it could bring a bunch of jobs to the area. But it is, like I said, like it's like the only green area in that square.
Absolutely, especially if we just passed the plastic bag and that that amendment or whatever it was. We should be keeping our land, our green land.
Well, the first one already got shut down when Prologis and Amazon were trying to make a logistics spot right there, and that got shut down because that would just look ugly though. Yeah. That's why they have industry cities where they just have all the industries and logistics all in that one area. So I don't think that, because right across the street you have another strip mall type thing, and then right a few miles away you also have
we don't need another mall. We have so many in the area. We don't need anything else. We need our green land.
Yeah, well, I mean, when the economy's good, that's essentially when people think that they can keep building. And then next thing you know, I mean, with privatization, in theory, privatization works. Unfortunately, in practice, it's somewhat corrupt, especially in America right now.
Absolutely. And I think that if it were to pass ultimately with this special election, which I agree, people vote in a presidential election. They don't vote in midterms. They don't vote in special elections in January. You know, January is a very strange month to hold a special election. So I think that we'll have to watch that, but definitely Shoot, where was I going?
What if it doesn't pass in the special election? Do you think they'll try again? What is their next move?
I don't know. Then I think they're just going to keep trying to appeal it and then change it somehow, and then eventually, unfortunately, like if there's
Shouldn't
enough
there
money,
be a way to stop them?
well, I mean, essentially,
Besides keep voting?
Essentially, that's what the city
I mean,
council is
it sounds
there
like a
for.
groundhog effect, where it's like they pop up with another one. You just have to whack it down.
If it does get passed, I think it's a scary precedent for other cities that only have limited green space, and that,
Exactly,
essentially we're just going to see it Southern California big cement.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Privatization doesn't necessarily work in practice anymore, which brings us on to our next discussion. After Donald Trump's shocking win in this year's presidential election, the stock market rose to new heights. As many as 1,000 U.S. companies saw their stocks raised. The largest winner of the election was the Corrections Corporation of America, whom is the largest operator of private prisons in the United States. Corrections Corp saw an astounding 49% surge. The prison stocks did not only react to Trump's win, but also Hillary Clinton's loss as well. Clinton took aim at the private prison system during her campaign and even threatened to shut them down. Clinton took to her Twitter back in 2015 and wrote, quote, "We need to end private prisons. Protecting private safety should never be outsourced or left to unaccountable corporations," end quote. After that tweet was posted, the Corrections Corp stocks went down 6% and the GEO Group shares went down 4%. The private prisons dealt with depressing trades that were sometimes valued at less than 10 times the earnings. With Trump hardlining issues like illegal immigration and crime, the private prisons have a strong indication that they could benefit during Trump's upcoming term. Also, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) analysts have said the prison demand would go up under Trump's plan. Analysts said, in quote, "Private prisons would likely be clear winner under Trump, as his administration will likely rescind the DOJ's contract phase out and ICE capacity to house detainees will come under further stress, further necessitating a sizable contract detention population," end quote.
Well, that's all the time we have on this episode of The Report. Tune in next time for more news, views, and info. I'm Nicholas Garcia.
I'm Evan Boydston.
And I'm Michelle Gao. Stay fresh, Fullerton.